This week, the unmistakable shift in political tone at this year's Super Bowl. When it comes to minor children and gender dysphoria, should the culture butt out or lean in? And a preacher calls for violence against Elon Musk from the pulpit. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. And now let's meet our panel. Some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann, our managing editor. Adam Wittenberg is our deputy editor. And Valerie Cabana is a media contributor here at The Lion. Panel, we welcome you all as we turn to, for those of us in this part of the country, the Super Bowl, not the happiest outcome, a thumping by the Philadelphia Eagles over the Kansas City Chiefs. But there was a lot of talk about the politics around it. The first sitting president to ever attend it. Josh, there was also some other kind of cultural implications you noticed.
Yeah, and this comes from some of the advertisements that we saw. And there was some criticism of a couple ads about that were promoting women participation in sports, pro-women's sports and girls' sports ads, which seemed like a good thing in this current cultural moment. But some of the critics noticed maybe it was too little too late from Nike, for example, who continue to promote transgender participation in sports. And then the NFL ran an ad, a flag football ad, which pitted an elite female athlete against some varsity boys and implied that girls can beat boys, or at least this girl could. And so there was some pushback about the biological implications. Are they ignoring a biological reality here? To promote what seems to be a better point, or a good point, and that is, why not have varsity flag football in high school girls' sports?
Yeah, Adam, this has always been sort of an interesting thing. The NFL, I think over the years, has tried through marketing and other means to reach women, to get a larger female audience watching the NFL. Of course, we're talking about advertisers here, but what about the women watching the Super Bowl?
Yeah, well, what was interesting is some of the critiques of the ad, some of the strongest critiques came from women. There was a group, Women Are Real, posted on X, formerly Twitter. I hate this ad with all my heart. We know we can't compete against a team of men. It's a lie. And there were other comments like, leave women out of this. And I kind of would fall in that same camp of like, let's lift up women's sports for the sake of women and show their amazing accomplishments. But I think people, even some women posted, they didn't like this comparison thing and this kind of rivalry stuff, and they found that unhealthy.
Valerie, what about that? I mean, can women watch football? Can they watch the NFL? And does it have to be a discussion about men and women on equal playing fields and competitiveness? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that flag football for women in high school sounds awesome. If I had that opportunity, I would have capitalized on it. Now, I loved running with the guys. I was raised by my dad, which put me in a situation to where I wanted to compete. Now, when we look at women's sports and biological men competing on a woman's team, that is completely inappropriate, and it is dangerous to women. But this flag football commercial, I saw it to be empowering. The Nike commercial, I thought that was empowering for women in sports. While we might have the argument, oh, it's too late, my thoughts are they're doing something about it. And as a woman, I didn't feel any type of threat by that. I definitely felt empowered. We kind of covered how in the NFL commercial, she threw the football at one of the guys. That guy was being mean to her. He was being demeaning to her. And when I was in high school, I would have done the exact same thing. So I really liked these commercials, and I think that it is a step in the right direction. If we step back and we look at it and we say, okay, you're overcorrecting or you're too late, then we're not moving forward as a society. When we can just stop and say, okay, they're at least trying, and we're not reading too deep into it, then I think that we're making progress.
Is the idea of this ad at this time and this high-profile game to appeal to women at a time when maybe you wouldn't run it during the regular season, Valerie?
I think that a lot of this is a response to Donald Trump winning the election. We all know that number 17 on his agenda was keep men out of women's sports. And so the media is going to try to trend with what's happening in society to continue to make money. When you're trending with what's happening in society, you're going to go up financially. And so I think that's what they're doing. But I like the way that we're trending because I like the way that this administration is taking us.
We're going to get into more of this and the Super Bowl and the reaction to some of the politics around it coming up a little later in the show. But I do want to shift to Trump. It does seem like just about everything revolves around the newly elected President Trump. And Adam, the steel tariffs that have been announced, 25% globally across the board. Your reaction?
Well, Trump's a man of his word, and he has used tariffs effectively to pressure Canada and Mexico to step up their border enforcement. And he might be igniting something of a tariff war. But you know what my strongest reaction to this is? Donald Trump is more pro-worker than 10 Democrats put together.
Josh?
Yeah, he is keeping his promise. He said that he would be putting these tariffs in place on steel, and he also told one reporter it would include aluminum. The U.S. steel industry is excited about this because already they are struggling to compete with steel that's imported from Brazil and China and other places. And it's a part of his broader economic agenda, it seems like, to promote U.S. growth within the U.S., U.S. manufacturing. And so, you know, we'll have to wait and see the effects, but certainly those within the U.S. steel industry are pretty excited about it.
The new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has wasted no time in making some changes. Number one, he's done away with Fort Liberty as the new name of the old Fort Bragg. He's reinstalled that name, Fort Bragg, down in North Carolina. And he's also said that this entire notion of diversity is our strength is dead as far as he's concerned. And he gave a lecture to that effect. Valerie, your reaction?
DEI in the military is not important. That's a hot take, but I said what I said. We don't need a military that can allude at all to being weak. We want to be looked at as a threat to other countries. That's what makes America strong. Being in the military is an incredibly high honor. It is one of the most selfless things that someone can do. And unfortunately, everyone can't do it. There are certain things that disqualify you from being in the military. Bad health, if you can't pass a physical, your height, your weight. Those are all things that are taken into consideration because we have to have a strong military.
In fact, very specifically, Hegseth said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, Josh, diversity is our strength is one of the most foolish things he's ever heard in reference to the military. Diversity is our strength. He doesn't like that at all.
That's right. And what he also said was, we will treat everyone with respect, and we will judge you as an individual by your merit and your commitment to the team and the mission. And so he says that's the way it always was, and that's the way it should be and will be. And so it's, again, part of this administration's push for merit. And in a sense, it's a kind of equity, I think, maybe truer to the word equity, treating people fairly, which means that you can earn your place and that you can compete. And, you know, it's the same rules apply to everyone. Nobody's favored.
Yeah, and what is it they always said? Nobody's ever met an atheist in a foxhole. I mean, you have to have a shared common sense of purpose when you're going to war, for heaven's sakes. Adam, I want to turn to you. School choice, of course, we know, we've talked about this. Linda McMahon, Donald Trump's pick to run the to run the education department. He said he hopes that she works her way out of a job soon if he gets his way. But the school choice discussion, something we cover a lot at readline.com.
Well, we do, and we're doing a really great job helping you get a picture of school choice in your state and school choice proposals. I think I counted today something like up to 12 states right now. Texas, Tennessee, Kansas, Wyoming are looking at or passing or are in the midst of passing these proposals. But what I kind of pointed out in this story is getting a bill passed is like half the battle, or maybe less than half. One guy said it's like running the first mile of a marathon. And this can get gummed up because just because you finally get it through the legislature and then the governor signs it or it's their veto overridden, it can go into the hands of bureaucrats, maybe in the State Department of Ed, and they're not real excited about making this happen. They might drag their feet. Or, this is a big one, the law said we want you to make a program that does certain things. But sometimes in that process of crafting it, the bureaucrats leave stuff out, change the program. And so this expert I talked to, he really encouraged parents and advocates and principals, go to the meetings, follow through, stay involved at every step, because this can go off course quickly if you don't monitor it.
Josh, I couldn't help but notice in Missouri, the newly elected Governor Kehoe made school choice part of his inaugural speech. And I assume maybe there were other governors around the country, didn't pay attention to all of them, but it was interesting that he made that a centerpiece.
That's right, and we've seen in the past few years that the biggest and best school choice programs that are passed in a state really take a governor's strong leadership to pass those. We saw that in Iowa with Governor Kim Reynolds. We've seen that in Arkansas with Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We've seen the expansion in Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis, and now we're watching Texas closely with Governor Abbott, who's been on this now for at least a second year. And so it takes strong governors' leadership to do this, to call for appropriation of funds in a budget, for example. And so we'll see here in Missouri, we've got a pretty small tax credit-based scholarship program right now, which is loved by parents. School choice continues to pull really well among parents all over the United States. And so we'll have to see, not just here in Missouri, but as Adam said, some of these other states, what kind of progress will we see this year? And so far, it seems like the appetite's pretty big.
Meanwhile, in Louisiana, something interesting. You know, we cover the courts, we cover the culture, as we say here, and this is sort of a story that meets both the courts and the culture. In Louisiana, as they're deciding, Valerie, on the 10 Commandments publicly displayed in public classrooms. Some have said this is just a governor being needlessly antagonistic. What do you say?
You know, this has sparked nationwide debate. People all over, Christians think it's a great thing. Anyone that's not a Christian, and some Christians disagree with this. And I gotta tell you, I kind of fall on the end where I don't think that the 10 Commandments should be in the classroom. But here's why. When you open that jar of worms, you have to think about, as a Christian, how that might backfire. If you put 10 Commandments in the classroom, then other groups that you might not agree with are going to also want to put their ideologies in the classroom. This is why school choice is so great, because when we have school choice, as a parent, you can choose what type of things, as like religion, that you want in your child's education. For instance, if I wanted to send my kid to a Christian school, I can. If a Muslim wanted to send their kid to an Islam-based school, they can. If I wanted my kid to focus on theater, they can. But that is because school choice is moving right now. So with that being said, this is controversial. I love the Lord, but because of what could backfire with the 10 Commandments in the classroom, I say that we're going to have to keep them out.
Just briefly, Adam, agree, disagree with Valerie there?
Actually, I take a different point. I think this is being put in not for religion, but it's a historic document. You can put the Constitution, the Magna Carta on the wall, which were based on the Bible and 10 Commandments. And one other counterpoint, which religion is it establishing? Judaism? Christianity? It's not even clear, so I don't think it violates.
And I would counter that and say that there are 3 commandments of the 10 Commandments that are Christian specific. While we do look at the Bible as a historic document, the Constitution and whatnot are U.S. documents that are specific to our country, whereas the Bible is a worldwide document that does focus on the God that we believe is the one true God, but that everyone else might not agree with.
Josh, quick ruling before we go?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me, we're seeing a similar thing play out in this case in Oklahoma that's going to be before the Supreme Court about this religious Catholic charter school. And the question is, on one hand, does the Constitution guarantee a freedom from religion in public places? The ACLU in this case is saying that they're worried that students would be held captive to Scripture. But the other side is arguing, actually, you're discriminating against religion if you're basically banning these things only because they have a religious tie. And so, you know, it's a hard constitutional question.
Great discussion. Panel, we will continue to cover that at readline.com. Now, when we return, some of the sights and sounds from the past week on cable news and on Capitol Hill. That's when the Lion Week in Review rolls on next. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. If you missed any of the show, or you're interested in more great news and information like you're hearing today, be sure to regularly check out The Lion online at readlion.com. So, panel, let's dive into some of the sights and sounds from the week on TV and cable news with a pastor in Tennessee who this weekend used his pulpit this past weekend for a pretty shocking message. Take a listen.
This is an attempt to take us back to a day that we do not want to go and we will not go. Therefore, there will be conflict. I pray that the peace of God will win out and overcome the madness that is attempting to take over this nation. And I will say to you, beloved, no one likes violence, but sometimes violence is necessary. When Elon Musk forces his way into the United States Treasury and threatens to steal your personal information and your Social Security check, there is the possibility of violence. Sometimes the devil will act so ugly that you have no other choice but to get violent and fight. Well, someone might say, now, Reverend, you shouldn't be talking about violence. This isn't the Christian thing to do. Well, I will say, why not talk this way? Because Jesus did.
So, Josh Mann, I start with you only because I know you have some background in theological study. I am certainly no theologian, but can you point me to where Jesus encourages violence?
No, I can't, but I can say that this man was interviewed on his local television station, and he said it comes from Matthew 11, where it's a really cryptic passage that talks about violent men taking the kingdom by force, but that is an extremely obscure passage to interpret. It's difficult. There's not a lot of agreement about what it means, and here's what I can tell you. When Jesus was arrested, one of his disciples tried to resist Jesus' arrest, Jesus rebuked him. So I think it's important to point out, generally Jesus' teaching is one of the avoidance of such conflict, such as turning the other cheek. What concerns me more is his reference to the devil, and I've seen this happen from a lot of different political persuasions and Christian positions where basically you blame your opponent or whatever you disagree with being in cahoots with the devil. You need to present some evidence for that. That's pretty strong language, and it's no wonder that some people are saying, look, that sounds like you're actually calling for violence against Elon Musk. He denies it, but I think it's easy to see why his words are construed that way.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the factual charges in that sermon, Valerie, I don't know that I've ever heard a pastor tell his congregants they must be prepared for violence.
I don't think I have either, and I guarantee you, Chris, that would have been the last day that I was in that church, because that is not the message that our Lord sends. And you have to understand that he is inciting violence over our government, knowing where our tax dollars are being spent, and then educating the American people on that. I think that we have the right to know.
It's a strange thing, Adam, because it's a factual matter. Elon Musk is not forcing his way into the Treasury.
Right. I very much agree with what both Josh and Valerie said, and I would say that there is a good and normal way to encourage political activism. If he really believes this is a cause of justice, you can encourage your folks to, write their senator, their representative, their congressman, and all these kinds of things. But talking about the need for or even inciting violence, if the roles were reversed and this was a, Republican pastor and it was a, Democrat in office, I guarantee you the media would be all over this and talking about how horrible this is.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times we've heard about hate speech from the pulpit, Josh, right? Have we not heard that 1,000 times when you're talking about Scripture, and particularly on issues like LGBTQ issues? We've heard consistently when pastors are just citing Scripture, it's hate speech. I don't know what this would be.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think, we've got to look at it. We've got to, I would support his right to say these things on the freedom of speech grounds, but I do think he's wrong here, and I think probably in hindsight can himself understand why people are construing his words as calling for violence, even though he denies it.
While we're on the topic of Doge and Elon Musk, the hysteria around his work, it continues, and the Democrats on Capitol Hill are saying plenty. Here's Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut.
You have used incredibly strong language, a constitutional crisis, grossly unconstitutional, pretty alarming language.
Yeah, listen, I think this is the most serious constitutional crisis the country has faced. Certainly since Watergate, the president is attempting to seize control of power and for corrupt purposes. The president wants to be able to decide how and where money is spent so that he can reward his political friends, he can punish his political enemies. That is the evisceration of democracy. You stand that next to the wholesale endorsement of political violence with the pardons given to every single January 6 rioter, including the most violent who beat police officers over the head with baseball bats. And you can see what he's trying to do here. He is trying to crush his opposition by making them afraid of losing federal funding, by making them afraid of physical violence. And so, yes, this is a red alert moment when this entire country has to understand that our democracy is at risk. And for what? the billionaire takeover of government.
Adam, just briefly, I much like the pastor, I don't understand why an audit of government departments is this massive threat that both the pastor and the senator are speaking of.
Yeah, well, the Democrats who have run the government, even when maybe there's been some Republicans in power but have been entrenched, don't want these things to come out. And whenever we listen to Senator Murphy talk, we should remember he's one of the most shameless politicians in Washington. He'll say anything to toe the party line. He really wants to be president. I've actually covered him when he first got into politics in the 2000s in Connecticut. He's the same guy who said Kamala Harris has been tough as nails on the border. He said that at the DNC convention. That's how badly he wants to get ahead. And one last thing I'll point out about Mr. Murphy is he criticizes Musk for being a billionaire. Well, Chris is now a millionaire, according to his congressional filings. He did not enter office 18 years ago a millionaire. Now he has over $1 million in assets and investments and all that. So for him to be crying about Doge and Musk because he's a billionaire, like more than half of the politicians in Congress are millionaires, and Chris is an absolute hypocrite.
Couple of interesting moments on Bill Maher's show this past weekend. As they discussed, we go back to the NFL. We were talking about this off the top of the show. A cultural shift in presentation by the NFL. Take a listen.
I noticed that at the Super Bowl, there, for the first time in, I think, 4 years now, the Trump administration is making them take away "end racism," which they had written in the end zone, right? And when
why? It just seems silly. I mean,
to do it or not to do it?
Why get rid of it?
Oh, I could tell you why.
I know, but it's just like you're
because it was stupid to begin with.
Yeah, but it's
let me ask you, who is it for? And if you're a racist and you see "end racism" in the end zone, you're going to stop being a racist?
A rare kind of, I guess, moment of agreement with Bill Maher and maybe some who might support Donald Trump. By the way, I would just clarify, Trump didn't order any such thing. This was the NFL's decision. Valerie, you want to speak to it?
I think that Bill Maher has a great point. When you think about the people who are attending NFL games, I would include myself because I attend NFL games. We don't blatantly want racism. And like he said, if there is a racist and he sees end racism, I would honestly argue that he might even want to go more off the deep end, which no one should ever do. That's absolutely horrible, and I would never endorse it. But Bill Maher's got a great point.
Here's another moment on the very same show with Chris Hayes from MSNBC, who has an interesting take on parents and minor children and giving them this what they call gender-affirming care. Take a listen.
I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the out of their business. Like, and let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your family.
But the argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that is the case.
I think in the vast majority, and we've been hearing from parents right now whose kids' medical care has been interrupted.
Josh, this is, it seems to me, sort of an outgrowth of the abortion discussion, quite frankly. It's none of our business as a culture if parents want to give chemically castrating drugs to their minor children, you say?
Yeah, well, I like that he's being pro-parent and pro-parents' rights, but this is a really different issue than, I mean, we're talking about irreparable harm done to these kids with these medical treatments. He uses this phrase, common sense, patriotic pluralism, and Bill goes, yeah, and then completely disagrees with the point that the guy tries to make with it. If he wants to be pro-privacy, pro-parent rights, and even promote common sense, patriotic pluralism, all that sounds pretty good. But promoting these medical treatments for kids who, next week are going to feel differently than they feel this week. That's just silliness.
I mean, I know that they wouldn't feel that way, Adam, about punishing children in certain. I mean, we have a national discussion about whether spanking is tolerable anymore, don't we?
That's right. Parent rights fly out the window. One question I always ask in the back of my mind is like, why does the left uphold this, like abortion or child sex changes and these surgeries, as like almost sacrosanct? Like it's so sacred to them. Why is there so much energy around this when, like you said, parent rights go out the window when it's, should you know about your kid's abortion or do you have a right to spank them? It's worth examining. Is there a little more going, or a lot more going on here in that regard?
Valerie, I'll give you the last bite on this one.
I think that we just need to dive into that. This is child abuse. He made a really, really great point talking about, oh, no, it's the parents making these decisions. Yes, it's the parents making these decisions. Some would argue that it's munching by proxy, whatever it's called, okay? Like, can we just stop and think about that? There are so many detransitioners coming out right now who are thankful that their parents didn't let them do anything chemically or physically to their body before they were 18. And then you have others whose parents did allow it who say they wish they wouldn't have. So, no, this is not okay. Kids under 18 should not have anything like this done. If they want to socially transition, they can. Whatever. I don't agree with it. But anything that is altering yourself permanently needs to happen after 18. You're an adult. You can do what you want. Are you going to let your kid have a cigarette because they feel like it? No. Are you going to let them have alcohol because they feel like it? No. Why would you let them make the most life-altering decisions to their body?
Panel, thank you. Good stuff. When we get back, our favorite part of the week, we get to tell you what our favorite picks are at readline.com when the Lion Week in Review returns. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. We always like to wrap up each week's show by asking the panel their favorite stories, their favorite reads at readline.com. Adam, we start with you this week.
Yeah, I would say the story on the ads at the Super Bowl. It's just a great debate, and it's interesting to see both sides of being pro-woman or pro-sports, and it's worth reading.
Good debate this week on that. Valerie, your thoughts?
We're going to have to go with the NCAA banning transgender athletes from being in women's sports, biological males. This follows Trump's executive order, and I'm excited to see society following suit.
Josh Mann, your favorite story of the week?
Have you seen the price of eggs?
Oh.
Well, 100,000 of them got stolen in Pennsylvania from one of America's largest producers of free-range eggs. How could that happen? Well, you can read more about that at The Lion, but part of what this story also showcases is a rise in crime. There's actually an increase in such thefts from warehouses. The price of eggs and what's happening there with the bird flu. Tons of chickens are being killed across the country. That's interesting in itself, but also just other elements of crime, how it's being handled, how it's being prosecuted in various places. You can read stories like that and all the ones we talked about at readline.com.
What do you do with that many eggs? Sell them out of the trunk?
Yeah, you'd think they're going to black market, I guess.
It's amazing. Yep, be sure to read that and all these great stories at readline.com. That's going to do it for us this week. All the latest news is found there. And again, if you missed any of today's show, hope you'll check it out on YouTube. Hit rewind. You can watch this whole darn thing again. And check us out every single day at readlion.com. Until next time, thanks for downloading the show.